Lesley, thanks for being here.
My great pleasure.
So the joys and science of the new grandparent becoming grandma. So America's second most famous grandma, which you are. We'll get to the other one in a couple of seconds. I think I understand the joys thing, but the science, you contend that we're actually hardwired to really get into this grandkid. Is that true?
Well, you tell me why virtually every grandparent you've ever heard of who may have been very strict with their own kids, may have been controlling, may have been highly critical all the time, sit up straight, all turn into mushballs the minute they become a grandparent?
Because they're atoning for their sins as a mother or a father,
believe me, it is just something that happens. So all of a sudden, the word no is disabled. You know, it's universal. So where does that come from?
Because of this hardwiring, whatever it is not dissimilar from romantic love, the love you feel for the kid?
This is why I put science on the front page, because a biochemist told me that the wiring for romantic love in our brains and the chemicals that course through that for romantic love is exactly the same as for baby love. And when you fall in love with a baby, you use the same language.
Okay, let's stay with the title. Okay. The Joys and Science of the New Grandparenting. I think you learn when you read this, you are not your grandmother's Oldsmobile. I mean, that's pretty obvious. And there's data in here to suggest that we have become even more into grandparenting as the years goes along. Is that not true?
Well, we're more into grandparenting for many reasons. First of all, our children, probably both are working. Mm-hmm. They're stretched. They are exhausted, and they frankly need us. Childcare is ridiculously expensive. It can cost in some cities as much as college. So our children need us as babysitters, and they need our money. So we are getting more and more involved because they need us more and more.
And the joy part of this, the minute ago you totally dismissed. I mean, you were one of the first women to break into the industry at this kind of level. You worked like a dog. So you don't think there's I mean, you did. I mean, everybody knows your history. You don't think there's a piece of you that says, maybe I wasn't there for my kid as much as I should have been, so I'm really going to be there for those two little sweethearts on the cover. Is there none of that?
I think that I regret the things I missed. But my daughter, I talked her into this, but she always said, "Thank God you work, Mom." And I used to say that to her. Believe me, Taylor, thank God your mother is at work all day. I do regret things I missed, but I don't think my emotions and how I'm acting toward my grandchildren has anything to do with that. I do think it's all hardwired, and I think we all, I mean, you can't ever say all. Are you a grandfather?
No, I'm not.
You're not a grandfather? No, well, I can tell you that the emotions are unexpected. They're a surprise. We don't plan it out. It's overwhelmingly enormous, the kind of love we have for these babies, and we want to be in their lives so desperately.
Speaking of my grandfather, and the answer is no. You contend this is a gender-neutral kind of thing. You talk about the situation with your husband and what Parkinson's that he's suffering. What's the impact you contend was a causal connection between these grandkids and your husband's health?
Well, stunningly, when the first grandchild 5 years ago was born, his symptoms disappeared. And we went from specialist to specialist and said, what is going on here? And they could never figure it out. It was definitely Parkinson's. It isn't that he didn't have it. And the symptoms did eventually come back. But for 1 year, after having all the symptoms, he had no symptoms. And then, so my answer, since nobody could explain it, is just the emotional high of the love you feel for these babies. Did this enormous thing. And I worked with Bob Simon, who had severe depression, and his grandson was born, and poof, it went away.
So can you appreciate the notion? I'm sitting here talking to Lesley Stahl. We've been watching. Everybody feels they know you, even though we don't. You're a local kid, but we feel we know you, even though we don't. We just know you through a screen. You're as tough as anybody in the business, and you're writing the softest. I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean, it's almost like an out-of-body experience for the reader. Do you object to my saying? I mean, it is so weird.
Well, I don't think I'm the toughest. You know what's really funny?
You were tough. But go ahead.
No, what's really funny is Mike Wallace. He did...
Local kid.
Another local kid.
Brookline, yes.
Brookline. I'm from Swampscott,
I know that.
Mike Wallace did a lot of heartwarming pieces. He flirted with movie stars. He did funny pieces. He did musical pieces. But people only remember the tough, hard-nosed, investigative pieces that he did. So he got this image, even though there was a completely other side to him that was seen on television. And I think maybe a little of that has happened with me.
Can we talk? I mentioned you're the second most famous grandmother there in America. Let's talk about the most famous grandmother. Hillary Clinton, from time to time, is it Charlotte the name? I think the name
Charlotte.
of the I've heard you say that if you were her, you'd be talking about Charlotte even more.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I joined a focus group during the campaign, and they were Republicans. And I asked them, Hillary Clinton's being a grandmother, do you think that softens her image and would help with the negatives that she has, very high negatives? And these were Republicans. They said, yes, as long as it doesn't look like she's exploiting the kid. So she can't walk around with the child. But I thought after I did the focus group that if she mentioned the baby more and just reminded people that she's a grandmother, because grandmothers have this golden halo over their head, just the sense of a grandmother, people think love. They think unconditional love.
But doesn't that run afoul of the notion? One of the places she's doing not terribly well is white men. White men want toughness. Theoretically, that's why they're gravitating toward Donald Trump. You don't think so?
I don't think that's why they don't like Hillary.
Why do you think they don't like Hillary?
I think they see maybe too much toughness in her. And I really haven't looked at the polls to say why, but I think it's how she presents herself, more than that they don't want a strong leader.
Do you want a quiz? Sure, why not, Jim? Who are Arabella, Joseph, Kai, Theodore, Tristan, Chloe, and Spencer? Can't believe I'm stumping Lesley Stahl.
Kai.
I'll give you one more hint.
Okay.
The eighth one is Donald III. Now who are they?
Okay.
The 8 grandchildren of Donald Trump.
Right.
He's grandfather
Good for
too. Ivanka, allegedly his daughter, is, they say, his closest advisor. She's got at least a couple of kids. We interviewed her in New Hampshire, I think when she was very pregnant right before. Does it work for Trump if he talks about the grandkids, or it doesn't fit the MO?
Well, in my focus group, it was about grandmothers, and I think it does work only for grandmothers. You know how
Why?
many presidents? Because grandmothers have a reputation of being wholesome, baking cookies, being warm, and having that unconditional love. And grandfathers, they're the more playful ones. They do the horse playing, the throwing the kids around, and it's just not. It doesn't have the same connotation.
Well, let me just challenge that in one way. I was thinking a lot about this when I was reading your book. Bernie Sanders is 74.
He doesn't come across as a grandfather.
Well, except for the fact, stay with me on this. I'm not even sure I agree with myself on this, but he's saying what you describe here, you know, it's almost like the doting grandfather. You can have all the ice cream you want, you can have free college tuition, and that horrible parent of yours, that Hillary Clinton, she's not going to let you have those kinds of things. I mean, and young people are drawn to him. I'm not saying it's not ideological, it's not on the issues. You don't think there's a little piece of that in the incredible connection between young people and a 74-year-old guy?
Oh, you know something? I remember when Reagan ran for president, and the first time I went with him to a college, and they went crazy. I thought a rock star was coming into the stadium. Same kind of energy for this much older guy. So there sometimes is a connection with Grandpa. We love Grandpa, by the way. And maybe you're right. Maybe that sense of that generation and skipping your parents, you know, that idea that a common enemy, maybe there is something to it. But why isn't it working for her?
Well, you've written the book, not I. You know, I wasn't going to bring this up, but since you brought it up, briefly before we go, you were a White House correspondent for a long time.
10 years.
You faced a major dilemma as you were leaving the White House with Ronald Reagan.
I
Can
did.
you briefly describe to people what that dilemma was?
Yeah, that's not in this book.
I know it's not.
It's in the other book.
I know it is.
I had a meeting with him in 1986, and I thought...
It's your exit interview, right? Sort of the ceremonial goodbye to the correspondent.
Right.
Right.
And he seemed to be off in space. He didn't seem to be alert or even aware what was happening in the room. My husband was with me. He's a screenwriter. And I kept throwing out little things that I thought would amuse the president and engage him. Nothing, nothing, nothing. So I start composing a piece in my head about how the president is senile. So the press secretary said, her husband's a screenwriter. I'm telling you, Ronald Reagan popped to life. He went from 100 years old to 30. And he put his arm around my husband, and they went off to the corner in the Oval Office. And the press secretary couldn't get Reagan away from my husband, Aaron. And I thought, what the heck did I just see? And as we were leaving the Oval Office, he brought up things that I had said that he hadn't responded to when I said it.
Which convinced you that it probably, as a non-scientist, was
unwise
unwise for you to say what you were contemplating saying.
Oh, I didn't know what I was saying, so how could I say anything?
Before you leave, Lesley Stahl, in light of what happened this weekend, when you see 49 young people killed, and you care as much about these two little beautiful kids on the cover of your book, what do you say to yourself about the world in which they will grow up?
Well, don't think it doesn't just pop right into your head as a grandparent. That's what you worry about. What kind of a country, what kind of a world will they face? It just sits here. And I think every grandparent listening is going to say, I'm just like that. But I wonder if my grandparents didn't say the same thing, because every generation faces some kind of crisis, always, and we think when we're in the middle of it, it's the worst ever, but it certainly does feel like the worst ever.
Lesley, it's a pleasure to meet you. Congratulations on your book. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.